Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate being here. I want you to know that I look out here and I see the hills, I see the beautiful lakes and everything. It's not where I grew up. I grew up in a small community called Brooklyn, New York. A little bit different from what we see here. But we're gathered here today to keep our country free and independent. And let me assure you that we're gaining on the well-entrenched enemy. The job can be done, but there are no shortcuts. And I want to emphasize that. There are no shortcuts. Our organization is named after a man named John Birch. And I've been asked since I've been here in Montana that I should tell the story of John Birch, who he was and how we came to be known as the John Birch Society. John Birch was a young Christian missionary from the state of Georgia. He went to China in 1940 to work for his faith. While he was there, of course, World War II broke out. Early in the war, the United States government decided to say to Japan that you're not going to get away with what you've done at Pearl Harbor. So they commissioned a bunch of pilots and crews to take their planes and to do a bombing run over Tokyo. The man who led the raid was a man named Jimmy Doolittle. Some of you have heard that name, I'm sure. Well, they were told that they were not going to be able to get back to where they came from, and that they should take their planes after they dropped their bombs and head to China, and when they ran out of fuel, to just simply bail out and let the plane crash. Well, they did that. And Jimmy Doolittle and his crew were finally brought out of occupied China, occupied by the Japanese, by a young missionary named John Birch. Well, when they got back to the friendly forces led by General Clash Chennault and the famous Flying Tigers, Doolittle told them about this remarkable American who had been living amongst the Chinese, who could speak their language, and who was such a remarkable individual. So they got a hold of John Birch, and they asked him to join the forces, and he said he'd love to be a chaplain. And Chennault said, I don't need a chaplain, I have a chaplain, I need you, I need an intelligence operative who can live amongst the Chinese and who can help with the war effort. So John Birch was commissioned as a lieutenant in the United States Army Air Corps on the 4th of July of 1942. He spent the next 3 years working behind the Japanese lines, reporting on troop movements. He even built airfields under their noses. He became absolutely famous amongst everybody in China working against the Japanese forces. And when the war ended, he was now a captain in the United States Army. He was sent on a mission by his superiors to go and find out if the Chinese Communist forces were friend or foe. And they killed him 10 days after the war ended in August of 1945. It took John Birch's parents almost 5 years to find out what had happened to their son. They knew that he had been killed, they got word that he had been killed, but they didn't get any details. The reason that they didn't get any details was that the leaders of our own government were protecting the Chinese communists. They weren't communists, we were being told, they were simply agrarian reformers. They were really good guys. No, they weren't. They killed John Birch because they knew he would be such a force within China in helping to stem the onrush of the Chinese Communist forces. Well, the man who eventually founded the John Birch Society, a man named Robert Welch, he heard the story of John Birch. He went down to Georgia and he met the parents. He did his own research. And in 1954, he wrote a book called The Life of John Birch. When in 1958 he decided to form our organization, he asked the parents if he could use their son's name as a symbol for the organization. They happily said yes, and that's how we became the John Birch Society.
How you doing, big
George
lad?
and Ethel Birch became early members of the society. I happen to have the opportunity to meet them at their home in Georgia years ago. John Birch is a legitimate American hero. He's a man who deserved to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor, but he never got it. And we're proud to be able to say that we are carrying on the work of John Birch. Now, I congratulate every one of you for being here. You care about your country. You worry about what we're leaving for our children and our grandchildren. You feel an obligation to pass on freedom and the opportunity we older Americans have enjoyed. You even feel an obligation to retain those extraordinary and far-seeing individuals of the late 1700s earned with their lives and their fortunes. I want to mention, of course, that none of them traded their sacred honor for the safety of a tyrant. They did give lives and fortunes, they never gave their sacred honor. It was 233 years ago that 56 of those men, unusually brave men, signed the Declaration of Independence. The king said he'd forgive all of them, but 2 if they wanted to recant. None of them recanted. But the 2 he said he would never forgive were John Hancock and Sam Adams. That's quite a credential, something that the descendants of John Hancock and Sam Adams can justifiably be very proud of. But those 56 men said they'd had enough of British rule. They protested against too much government. They put their lives on the line, and we are their beneficiaries. They were right then, but we have a great deal more to protest in 2009 than they did in 1776. If Britain's King George could come back today and attend an event such as this, he might come up to the microphone, and people would want to say, well, what are you doing here, King George? And he'd say, well, I have a question for you Americans of today. And my question is, how do you like taxation with representation? And of course, the answer is, you don't like it, and I don't like it. That's part of the reason we're here. I like to tell the story of the Navy ship captain. He's plowing along at sea in his naval vessel and doing a good job of it. All of a sudden, there's some lights flashing out front. The lights are saying, turn your ship 5 degrees to starboard. So he told his man right away, he said, no, you tell him turn his ship 5 degrees to starboard. So the lights went back that way. And then the message again came right back, no, you turn your ship 5 degrees to starboard. Well, now the captain of the ship was very upset. And he was pretty angry about it. And he told his man, he said, you tell them, here's the message. I'm a captain of the United States Navy aboard this U.S. naval vessel. You turn your ship 5 degrees to starboard. And then the final message came back. He said, I'm a seaman second class and I'm aboard a lighthouse. You turn your ship 5 degrees to starboard. Now I tell the story because it gives rise to the opinion that it's not how many stripes you have on your sleeve, it's not how many letters you have after your name that makes you important. It's the ground you stand on. And if you stand on the ground that I think you do stand on, good for you, and don't ever give it up. Now, like you, I'm a great admirer of the U.S. Constitution. The document, of course, was written 11 years after our nation began, and it was finally agreed to 1 year later when a sufficient number of the states ratified it. It was the work of a group of men who had learned from history, didn't seek power for themselves, and knew that the government and not the people should be limited. That's an amazing group. That they should assemble in Philadelphia in 1787 and produce what they did has to be one of the high water marks of man's history. The Constitution has received extraordinary praise from a lot of different places, even some praise of all future generations. William Gladstone, another British Prime Minister, he concurred. He said it's the greatest piece of work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man. Francis Alexis de Tocqueville surveyed our nation more than 50 years after it began, and he heaped praise on the American constitutions, obviously referring not only to the U.S. Constitution, but the states.